Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, world. Truly a worldly audience we have managed to amass over the times we have done this. So thank you for joining. For those of you who are able to join, and for those of you who are unable to join, this recording will be provided to you. Few ground rules or housekeeping rules, whichever way you want to adjust to that parameter. Show is being produced in the back by Caroline O'Driscoll, and my colleague and right hand Shelley will run point on this. I'll try to interject wherever I'm needed. Purpose and productivity is the umbrella under which we have done most of these messages. And every once in a while, we decide that in addition to my qualitative rambling, there is a necessity for some cohesion and quantitative bookends. So Shelley has always provided that to my own journey, and hopefully she'll provide that for you guys as well. What I'm going to do right now is, like always, introduce you to the most able part of our tandem. Shelley, welcome.
Thanks, Krish. Hi, everybody. It's so good to be here with you again, and welcome to our webinar today. I love this topic of going from creation to execution. It's really a reflection of what has been the majority of my career, taking an idea and carrying it forward to implementation and completion. And I think it's interesting how this process of going from creation to execution has changed now that we are in a completely digital world. We've had to make some adjustments along the way, and it's not as linear as it used to be. It's interesting that in the times we're living in right now, this entrepreneurial attitude of innovation is not really a choice anymore. It's really a requirement to cultivate growth and opportunity. And I used to think of entrepreneurship as just a business term, but it's almost a way of life now. And what I've realized is that you don't have to be an entrepreneur to be entrepreneurial or to have the entrepreneurial mindset. That mindset of innovation and creation and wanting to see a project through from start to finish, that mindset isn't exclusive to someone who's only an entrepreneur. We can all embrace that mindset, and it's almost necessary during these times. But within that mindset, we can either be that person that has 100 great ideas, or we can be that person that chooses to really execute on one or two of those ideas and see it through from creation to execution. Krish and I recently did a collaborated podcast on the Purpose and Productivity podcast, if you're subscribed to that. We did the segment on creators versus executors, drawing from our own experiences of working with each other. And we talked about how important it is to understand and recognize each other's roles and strengths and weaknesses so that we can adapt and adjust accordingly when it comes to communication and team dynamics. And I think it'll be a good exercise for all of us before we dive into the content to see what category we best identify with. Now, there are several strength finders and assessments out there that can help you identify your role as either a creator on the one hand or an executor on the other hand, or perhaps something in between. But there was one specifically that I had mentioned in that podcast segment called the Team Dimensions Profile, which is a branch of the DISC assessment. And I'm going to share my screen with you guys here in a second and show this to you, because as we go through this discussion, and Krish speaks from the creator role and I speak from the executor perspective, I think it'll be great for those of us that are watching to quickly look at these and think about which role we resonate the most with. So let's quickly take a look at this. I'm going to share my screen and pull up this chart. Hopefully you guys can see that. So what we see here is a Z chart that kind of illustrates the process of a project from creation to execution. So this chart really outlines the different stages of the project from start to finish, but we're more so going to focus on the description of what these roles mean and see how we can relate to these roles. So at first, at the top, we've got creating. This is the role of the creator, right? During this stage, new ideas are born, and creators are known for generating new ideas and original concepts. They typically prefer abstract thinking and activities and prefer unstructured innovation. And that's what they really thrive on. And then next we've got the advancers. So that's right over here to the right. And the advancers are typically responsible for communicating new ideas and carrying them forward. So they develop ways and ideas to try to move the process forward from the creation stage. There's a lot of communication that happens with the advancers. And then next at the bottom, we've got, going across to the left, we've got refiners. And during this stage, new ideas are scrutinized to see if they're realistic. So if you're a refiner, you're typically someone that challenges ideas. You like to analyze the project for flaws. You like to look at it with objectivity and ask clarifying questions and really refine and perfect the idea. And then we're going to go down to the bottom to executing. The executors can also be thought of as implementers, right? They ensure that all of the important activities and details are in place. They're very much so bottom line thinkers, very detail oriented, very logistic minded. And they're focusing on moving that process forward to completion. And then there's another category here that's not mentioned here called flexors. And flexors are typically pretty flexible and can kind of rotate between any of these roles depending on what the need is. So we've got creators on the one hand, on the top, and then we've got executors at the bottom, and in between we've got the advancers and the refiners. So I hope you guys can see perhaps a little bit of yourselves in one of these, maybe not perfectly fitting into one of these categories. Some of us are kind of a mix of all of them. I know for me personally, I heavily identify with the executor role, but I definitely have some refiner tendencies as well. So we can keep that in mind as we go through this discussion. So I'll go ahead and switch back now. Okay, so planning, perfecting, and performing. Let's get into this. It's going to be fun. So the first step, we've got planning. Now, the word that I think of when I think of this step in the process is measure, in a couple of different ways. The question here to ask in the planning phase is what needs to be done, right? What's the big idea? Now, if you're a creator, you are super involved in this step. The creator box up at the top at the chart that we just looked at, because you're the idea generator. You're the one that comes up with the plans to bring to the table. But it's important to remember that not every good idea is the right idea, right? We have to measure our idea against the big picture, against the why, against our purpose. Now, this is the purpose and productivity webinar, so I think you'll hear us talk a lot about the why and our purpose and our mission, because it's so important to consider that when making decisions, even when it comes to considering ideas that are brought to the table during the brainstorming phase of a project. Now, being an executor, I am fascinated by how the creators in my life have these extraordinary visions and are able to come up with these innovative ideas right off the bat. But this is where I think those of us that are executors need to really measure these brilliant ideas against the big picture, right? Creators aren't analytic in nature, like we just saw. Their passion and their enthusiasm are much needed, but sometimes the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish can get lost in some of that creative energy. You know, there's a quote by Woody Williams that I like. It says, "No matter how good the team or how effective the methodology, if we're not solving the right problem, the project fails." So it's important to remember not every good idea is the right idea. And in order to plan effectively, we have to measure the idea against our why, against our purpose, and against the big picture. Krish, what are your thoughts on that from the creator perspective?
Well, for those of you watching, you kind of know how our ideas get executed, because I come up with them at a fairly rapid pace. But that's my nature. I wake up earlier than most thinking about how to stay ahead of the competition. Now, there are two components here that validate what Shelley just said. First, your competition is getting keener, are you? Which means, are you just sitting there to get there, or are you arriving more informed? So a creator's primary role is to generate new ideas and new opportunities for the organization. The second component, which comes from my late mentor, Zig Ziglar, was inspect what you expect, or as I heard it put somewhere else, measure what you treasure. So if your treasure is what you want the output to be of your creativity, there's another thing which actually I subscribe to quite a bit, and that is it's easier to criticize than to create. Executors have that inbuilt constructive criticism, that analytical desire. So when you surround yourself by executors as a creator, it is primarily important to realize that they are not negating your idea because they are rooting for you not to succeed, but they are negating the depth of the idea because they have that inbuilt desire to see you succeed. So they're paring away your faults so you can rise freely. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the creation phase, it's common for there to be just this burst of vision and innovation. And I think it's so important, Krish, we always say, keep the main thing, the main thing. And I think the key to this is asking the right questions, more so as an executor or perhaps an advancer, if you identified that on the chart that we just looked at, asking the right questions of the creator and really honing in on what exactly their vision is, and remembering not every good idea is the right idea. And I think this requires really good collaboration and communication. Perhaps the onus might be more on us as the executors or the advancers to dissect and analyze and really ask those clarifying questions so that we can get a better idea of what the creators envision. So this brings us to our next step of perfecting. And the word here that I thought of was manage, right? So we've got measure in the planning stage and then manage in the perfecting stage. So the question here is, how do we execute our strategy? We have to manage our expectations, right? And think about how to get from A to B. So the idea here is daily innovation. What's the small idea for today? We asked ourselves, what's the big idea? What are we trying to accomplish big picture wise? But the idea here is daily innovation. What's the small idea for today? We've already defined the big idea, but we have to prepare for execution by asking ourselves, what do we need to do today, tomorrow, next week, for the next 6 weeks, depending on what our timeline is. Now, how do we arrive at answering this question, the question of what's the small idea for today? We have to define those clear action items and come up with a timeline, a project timeline. We have to prioritize those action items, and we have to assign those items based on clearly defined roles for everyone that's involved. Another important component here is keeping a scoreboard, really measuring our progress against the final goal. And all of these should answer the how that will ultimately result in the execution of our strategy. Now, a part of this perfecting process, which I think is often overlooked, is to critique and is to get feedback. Before and during this intense preparation process, we have to consistently hold our idea up to critique to ensure that it has merit. But we not only need to do this often, we have to do it with the right people. We have to ask ourselves, do our critics have the knowledge and the expertise in the specific area that I'm asking for feedback in? In a talk that I recently gave for a leadership show, online talk show based in South Africa, we talked about the importance as leaders of not just doing the right thing, but understanding the right timing. Doing the right thing at the wrong time is still the wrong thing and can still have the same effects or the same consequences of doing the wrong thing. Just like doing the right thing at the wrong time is doing the wrong thing, asking the right questions but to the wrong people can have the same effect of asking the wrong questions. The end result is misinformation. So what's the point of all of this? The point is to make sure that we are asking for feedback. And when we're asking for feedback, we're asking people that have a proven track record in that specific area of our need, understanding the backgrounds and the strengths of those who you are asking for critique so that you can filter out what may or may not be accurate feedback. Krish, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, my catchphrase on preparation has always been that preparation makes up for lack of talent. Over my 30-year career, I've adequately expressed many times that I'm the most no-talented hack you'll ever find. But odds are you won't find a person more prepared than me. I wake up ahead of the competition. Even as a creator, I do realize this. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Ideas that are workable and have some stick-to-itiveness require constructive criticism and good feedback. Now, here's a component on feedback that is vital. Don't listen to everybody just because you think they have the right to give you advice. This is where cultural assumptions will derail you. Societal assumptions will derail you. As is evidence here, I take a lot of advice from someone much younger than me. And the reason for that is there's a different demographic for just about everything you do. So I have a very old model, and my model is actually a biblical model. I always have someone very wise above me, always have someone that is a conduit that will listen to me, and I always have people around me that encourage me. So those three components are very vital in feedback. Have wisdom above. So not always will I just listen to the demographic advice. Sometimes the right thing is the right thing and you have to push through. Then you always have to. So here's the principle. The principle is no matter what you create, make sure you're learning so that you teach someone else. and allow yourself to be a catalyst. When you're a catalyst, feedback becomes easy because a catalyst remains objective to the process and facilitates the reaction. And as Shelley mentioned, feedback takes place constantly. If you're just waiting to come to the end for someone to give you an approval, that's a yes man. So make sure you're soliciting feedback, and she'll vouch for this. Many a time in a text, when I ask her for an opinion, I always put a question mark because it's important for me, because if she's executing, does she agree with what I'm saying, or is she just putting it out because I said it? It's vital.
You know, there's a quote from Malcolm Gladwell that says, achievement is talent plus preparation. And I like that you said preparing makes up for lack of talent. So let me put a statement out there, and I just want to get your thoughts. Achievement can happen with little talent, but lots of preparation. But achievement can't happen with lots of talent and no preparation. Would you agree with that, Krish?
Yeah, actually, there is a corollary to this. It comes from the old industrial time and motion studies. But one of the great industrial paradoxes is that when you're motivated, when you're excited, the people you're trying to impact will be excited. But when you're demotivated, the odds of them being demotivated are remote. So you have to make sure that you're doing the right thing for the right time at the right time for the right reason. But there's one other thing, for the right people.
That's right. That's right. Great. So we've talked about planning and perfecting, and now we move on to that final stage of performing. So we've talked about measuring, managing, and now we manifest, right? And the idea here is that it's time to display or exhibit or finally roll out what we've planned and perfected. Now, in the previous steps, we asked and answered the questions of what and how, but I think it's so important to ask the why question again here before we roll out our implementation. So often when we come to this step of performing, we're focused on just that, performing, right? Let's bring to life everything that we have measured and managed. Let's bring to life everything that we have planned and perfected. But if you remember, in that first step of planning, when we asked about idea generation, we talked about coming up with these ideas. We said that we would measure those ideas against our purpose. Not every good idea is the right idea. So it's imperative that we measure the idea against the broader goal of what we're trying to accomplish. So that's our why. That's the reason why we're doing this. That's our mission. That's our vision. And oftentimes we forget to circle back to this in the manifestation stage or the performance or execution stage of the project. Connecting the project to the broader purpose and reminding yourself of this before performing, before manifesting, before executing goes a long way, specifically with the millennial generation. One of the topics that I speak on is demystifying the millennial myth, which is really just a pursuit to understand and decode the way millennials think. Most millennials want their work to be tied to a greater purpose. That's what motivates them and empowers them. So we talk about that in step one, but we're not really dwelling on that in step two, in the planning and preparation phase, because step two is really honing in on those action items and prioritizing and really focusing on the how aspect of getting the project done. It's more task oriented and action item driven, but now it's time to take all of those tasks and action items and turn them into reality and deliver. And of course, depending on the type of project you're working with, the execution may or may not be a one-time or a one-day thing. It might be something that rolls out over a period of time. So it's all the more important in this manifestation phase to revisit and remind ourselves and our teams of the why. It's game time now, we're going to perform, but why are we executing the strategy? Keeping that at the forefront of our minds can go a long way, specifically if you're working in groups or teams, or if you're working on a long-term project where it seems like it's taken forever to get to this execution phase. I know a lot of times when I've been involved in long-term projects, as I'm getting towards the end there, I feel the burnout. I've been so busy planning and preparing and perfecting that now it's time to execute. And honestly, I'm tired. I just want to get this over with. But that's not the attitude we want to have when it comes to the step of performing. Right? We want to be excited. We want to be empowered. We want to be ready to manifest what started off as a simple idea all the way back in step one. One of the best ways to restore that enthusiasm and that motivation and that energy is to remind ourselves of our purpose and how engaging in the performance of this task or this project or this idea fulfills that purpose or that mission. Krish, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things of revisiting the why is realizing that an overextension of a strength is a weakness. Sometimes in our creativity and even in our execution, we become one-trick ponies because we rely so much on that one attribute that defines us. We are proud of it, we're capable within it, we have a desire to exhibit it. And as a result, we share that more often than not. So whether you're an executor or whether you're a creator, your burnout will happen if you become a one-trick pony, which means if your feedback is getting constant feedback because you're just delivering the same thing over and over again, these are the issues. Now, here's the other side of it. Variety is the spice of life, but monotony buys the groceries. There is some basics that we need to understand. I don't like waking up at 4 o'clock, but I have to stay ahead of the world. The 97%, 3% that I use as a statistic, we articulated it in the book Top Performance, and it's a number that's been around for years. 97% of the people in this world are comfortable people. And these are the denizens that occupy an office. They're comfortable, they're happy, they're tax paying, they're law abiding, but 3% are effective. Effective people are usually people who have no flash, they're fairly boring, but they're consistent. And this morning I wrote an article on something, and I remember the question I was asked last night at another event I was at was asking about Mr. Ziegler's consistency. They said, can a person be that motivated for that period of time? No, here's what happened. He became a caricature of himself. These are the attributes. Within purpose, one of the things I would encourage you is identify the qualities that define your basic role as an executor or creator, and then start claiming them on a regular basis, and now force your behavior to adapt to that which you have already believed within. And some amazing things will happen, and you'll begin to discover the why for yourself. So.
There's an illustration that you use on, I think it's Neiman Marcus, and the whole concept of the why and not changing your why. Can you share that with us?
Sure. For those of you who are familiar with Neiman Marcus, it's an organization that has kind of wrote the blueprint for customer service within the high-end retail sector. And years ago, the lady who was instrumental in defining that basically once articulated that there are a lot of myths that take place in generic customer service that are considered exemplary, but Neiman Marcus gets the credit for it. So she said it's really good to live and build a brand where all the extraordinary things that happen are credited to you. But she gave one of the stories of a man who came there to buy a suit. And again, it's a high-end suit because it's a high-end establishment. And Stanley Marcus, who founded Neiman Marcus, of course, from Dallas, Stanley Marcus said, a sale is never complete until the person never comes back with the product he purchased, but returns with someone else who buys. Okay, so he knew retail. But in Neiman Marcus, this man went in to buy a suit, and they measured him for a shirt. And he says, along with this suit, this is the color of shirts that will go well. You're spending a lot of money on suits. We think this is your neck size, this is your sleeve size. And the man very quickly said, yeah, but I buy my shirts at, and mentioned another store. Obviously, he was investing in a high-end suit, so maybe he had a budget and he was going to buy his shirts at a discount place, but he mentioned it. Now, the person who was measuring him for the suit didn't do anything, didn't retaliate saying, hey, you know what? Why would you want to buy an expensive suit and then buy a cheap shirt? Instead, what they did was they augmented the experience. This is very vital in keeping the main thing the main thing. When the man came to pick up his suit, there were 3 shirts of different colors that matched that suit from that retail store that was discounted. What they did was they made ease in his shopping by saying, hey, we went and bought the shirts from where you would normally buy your shirts, but we're not going to charge you any markup for it. So we're just going to save you the trip of going there. It would be the same price had you bought them there. If for some reason now you don't want to do it, we'll just return it, no harm, no foul. What they established in that was a continuity that was very profound. What they said is, we're not in the discount shirt business. We are in the elevated suit experience. Many years later, I went to one of the stores where I went to buy a shirt because my body proportion is, I technically have to buy them as separates because the jacket and the trouser usually, the trouser becomes too big kind of thing. So I went to one of these places that specialized in suit separates. And when I walked up to the guy, many of you who have had retail understand this principle. You walk in and they say, can I help you? Our natural response is, no thanks, I'm just looking. And what we do is we're telling him that I'm going to waste time in your establishment. I'm going to mess up your productivity, but I'm just a browser. I'm not committed to the concept of commerce here. The guy who was offering me the suit said, as long as you're just looking, are you looking to just look or are you looking to look good? What would I say? No, I'm a loser. I want the cheap suits. No, you obviously, if you're browsing and there's no commitment, he says, why don't you waste your time in a place where I have the chance of making a greater sale? Now, what he did was I turned to my bride and said, this is cream. When we come to pick up our suit, he won't be here. Someone will snatch him up. It's a mindset. Culture is a mindset. Performance is a mindset. So execution, you have to realize when you look for those feedback mechanisms and all that, keep the main thing at all times. Just like Neiman Marcus, they're not in the discount business. We in the business that we are in, we do this, whether they're 5 or 50, it doesn't matter. We're in the advice business. We suit up, we get ready, we come 30 minutes before, we do our checks and balances. Caroline shows up the previous day, walks us through the process. And all of this is vital to producing a product that you're proud of. And that's the goal.
I love that Neiman Marcus illustration because they didn't change their why. They didn't change their purpose, but they still managed to accommodate that customer. And I think there's such a valuable lesson there for all of us. So just to quickly recap, plan, perfect, and perform, right? We've measured, we asked the what, we managed, we asked the how, and in the perform manifest stage, we revisited the why to remind ourselves of why we're even executing the strategy in the first place. You know that saying, ready, aim, fire, right? The saying goes in that order for a reason. And I think too often we get a great idea and we want to fire without first getting ourselves ready or aiming, and then we have to backpedal and try to aim and refire because we messed it up the first time. And I just love that concept of ready, aim, and fire. And I think it's such an easy way to remember the order of our priorities when we go from creation to execution. So what questions do you guys have for us? I think there was a question that came up in registration that we can.
While you're looking for that question, the place you don't want to be is ready, aim, 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 aim.
Yeah.
At some point, you got to pull the trigger, but you need executors around you because sometimes if you have a tendency to over prepare and underact, when you act, you'll hit the target. So make sure that the qualitatives and the quantitatives are in equal measure. So.
Great point. Great point. The question was, I have extreme talent when it comes to the preparation phase, but I fail on the execution phase. What advice do you have for me?
Well, one thing is, maybe I'll take you down, and I typically answer through experience. When I wrote my first book, I had followed all the goals that people gave me to write a book. Mr. Ziegler would always say, if you write now, 10 X amount of minutes a day or whatever, 1 and 1/10 pages a day. At the end of the year, you'll have a book. So I followed the advice. I just wrote a little bit every day, but at the end of the year, I had a volume of total stuff, which people said, hey, not only should you not publish this, we recommend you stop reading. We've never seen such drivel before. What I realized at that time was I can generate, but the best way for execution is being comfortable having a editor, at least in the book writing process. In life also, it's a generic rule. Now, when I ask for editing, I'm not asking for people to edit my core thought. I'm asking them to edit the flow of that thought so it would be more conversant with those that it needs to reach. So when Julie Ziegler edited my book, her comments to me were, she says, what you have is 300 pages. And when she returned it to me, there was about half of it was gone. It looked like a Shakespeare tragedy. There was so much red on the page. But she said, what you have here is a book. And I'm proud of it. Now, all these years later, I still reproduce it as my first work, but because it's for posterity. Just remember that. Whatever you do, your benchmark. In top performance, we said there are 3 levels of effectiveness. One is just your generic value, which is if you do what you're told, you'll be paid. You go home, no harm, no foul. If you do more than you're asked to do, you'll be validated, you'll be rewarded. But if you set the standard and you become the benchmark, you'll be remembered.
That's great. Do you have that in written form somewhere so we can send it out?
That's why you have to go back and listen to it and rewrite it. I don't do this. I just come up with ideas and somehow she puts it all and we have a book.
That was great. Please keep your questions coming. Let's see. How do you keep yourself with the same passion when you have started? I think they meant to say, how do you maintain the passion that you had when you first started a project?
Well, you're the one who said that you wanted to finish, so why don't you take a shot at it? Or you want me to?
Well, I think we both can. Before I answer this question, I just quickly want to add on to the previous question of the failure to execute issue that that person was having. I feel like failure to execute, it's kind of hard to answer not knowing the specifics of your situation and what areas exactly you failed, but failure to execution generally, I feel like happens because of two main things. And because I like alliteration, I'll say people and/or process. So with people, when I've seen failure to execute, it's either been because the right people aren't in place, or if the right people are in place, there's been a major lack of communication. So you've got, a VP and a manager that are both on the same page and are constantly communicating and completely understand all of the updates and last minute changes. And you've got an assistant and perhaps a middle manager that have no idea what's going on. All four of these people come together to execute. And it's a complete mess because no one has been communicating. So I've seen lack of communication contribute, be a huge component in failure to execute. And also people, perhaps not assigning roles based on people's strengths. And I think that's why in one of those beginning stages, we talked about how it's important to identify your role and assign strengths based on that role. On the process side, I think lack of preparation obviously is going to contribute to failure to execute. Perhaps you didn't think of every single component that was needed to execute. And so when it comes time to perform, we've all been in those situations where, we get hit with something and it's like, man, I didn't think about this. I wish I had thought about this or planned for this. I didn't even cover this in my planning session. That obviously can lead to a failure to execute. And to add to that, I'm going to say a lack of anticipation. It's well and good to have the perfect plan, but if you don't anticipate something going wrong, it's still going to lead to a failure to execute. One of the things, again, going back to that South Africa leadership talk show that we talked about, was manage the crisis before the crisis. So if you look at your process and you know that the success of your execution depends on one or two main things, that's great. But we have to think about what's going to happen if these one or two main things fall apart. Do we have a backup plan? And I've seen a lot of times where the lack of anticipation, the lack of being prepared with a backup plan can also lead to a failure to execute. So I hope that helps the person that was asking. Having the right people in place, making sure there's good communication, and making sure that you're anticipating all of, it's impossible to anticipate every single thing that can go wrong, but really looking at the big picture items. What are the make it or break it items that can go wrong? Simple example I'll give is with this webinar. A make it or break it item that'll lead to failure to execute is the machine that I'm on. If my computer doesn't work, that's a big ticket item that I need to be prepared for. Well, we anticipated that, which is why I've got a computer right next to me that I can jump on just in case this one falls through. There might be ingredients in your planning process that could go wrong that won't majorly affect your execution, and that's okay. But you have to identify those big ticket items where if that goes wrong, we're done. And I think anticipating that and preparing for that can help you execute better. Krish?
Let me just, from the positive, the side of failure is not fatal. It's not final. Failure is not futile. You learn. Hershey failed at many things. He's not remembered for his failure. He's remembered for chocolate. Disney failed many times in his vision, but he's remembered for Disney experience. You can let your past beat you, or you can let it teach you. Billy Graham often was asked that question, and the question was, why did he arrive at a point where for 50 consecutive years he was voted one of the most admired people in the world? He says, I'm the sum total of my experiences. If I had to go back, I would change some of the things, but I cannot, because if I change them, I wouldn't be where I am. So you have to take it in stride. If you take failure as an event, you will always improve, as Shelley said. If you take it as a person, you won't take the next step.
Great point, Krish. Great segue actually to the next question. How do you keep yourself with the same passion? I think, not to sound redundant here, but again, identifying your purpose and the reason as to why you're engaging in this activity is so important. And that's why when it came to the execution stage or the performance stage at the very end, we talked about how it's so important to revisit your why, because you spent all of this time planning and perfecting. and you're tired and you're burned out and you possibly want to give up at this point. But going back to why you started in the first place, I think is so crucial to keep your motivation going. What do you think about that, Krish?
Well, this is something that I learned very early on because I competed in an area which was unnatural for my origins. To want to be a pure communicator, a teacher, and a trainer in a Western world as a first generation immigrant with all of the other crippling nuances that came, I said I not only wanted to invade this space, I wanted to own it. So there's a difference between just participating to be accommodated and participating to be accepted, admired, and applauded. So you always have to look at it through the lens of how much do you want to challenge that which is in front of you, and are you just going along to get along, or are you going along to make a stand to take it to that next level? So let's look at it in terms of the process that she outlined. The illustration that was given to me years ago was this: you take water and boil it to 211 degrees, you get hot water that you can shave with or wash clothes with. You boil it to 212 and you get steam, and that'll propel a locomotive around the world. The difference between the tepid water of mediocrity and the steam of outstanding success is 1 degree. Sometimes we quit too soon, and that's why Adrian Rogers said, it's never too late to start, it's always too soon to quit.
Israel Paul in the chat box said, be at it or beat it. I love that.
Yeah, that's by a gentleman. It's actually a phrase coined by my dear friend, Dr. Pradeep Philip, who actually uses that. So
awesome. Question here that came up. People say failing forward is good. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and this comes Shelley's favorite person, John Maxwell. I mean, she needs to quote me more often than him, but that's
next
for
to you, my favorite person.
So, yeah, John Maxwell's book on, he says, failure is not falling down, it's refusing to learn something when you were down there. Now that's severe, but that goes back to the premise of failing forward, letting it be a launch pad to something. You never look at it as failure. You look at it as, just like this current climate we're in. A lot of people were saying new normal. Well, normal is average. It's the very word. Normal means status quo. How can you have excellence during average? So what you do is we changed our nomenclature and said new excellence and old excellence in a new and improved way. It's just a first person. Maxwell also said, fake it till you make it, break it till you make it, stake it till you make it, forsake it till you make it, and take it till you make it. These are what you call action axioms. So that's all failing forward, because every step of the way, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, and some are going to get rained out. But what happens is, if I had to use a baseball analogy, because I live in the West now, maybe it's the perfect analogy, but every at-bat is not going to be a hit. And every hit's not going to be a home run, but every home run has to be an at-bat and a hit. You have to keep swinging. How do you keep yourself with the same passion when you have started? I think we answered that, but here's the thing. They say repetition, they call it the mother of invention or whatever, but it is the architect of accomplishment. You do things over and over again, and over a period of time, at some point, it'll become smooth, it'll become easy. Let me give you an illustration, and this is an illustration that you can go online and find too, but it's Mr. Ziegler's illustration of that old-fashioned water pump, something that as I've traveled around the world, I've always managed to find one of these and take a picture next to it. I have a picture with me next to a water pump at the gravesite of Graham Staines. I have one in rural, in the Netherlands when we were riding a bike and all that. But I just love that illustration he gave of the old-fashioned water pump, because I grew up in India with them. There's one right next to my father-in-law's house. But he said something very profound that I'd never known all those years I used it as a source of water in India. He said, in order for the water to come out, you first have to put something in, which means you prime the pump. So that's our effort. Our effort means you always have to prime the pump. But then he added, he says, he uses a big story, and go online and find the story of Bernard Haygood and Jimmy Glenn. I'm pretty sure those names are indelibly imprinted in my mind. But he says that the deeper the well, the cleaner, the purer, the sweeter tasting the water is, which means the deeper the well, the more pumping you have to do after you've primed. At any stop, if you leave the handle, the water will go all the way down. But if you pump fervorously, I mean, with great fervor and with great speed initially, with great passion and with great commitment, content after you have primed it. You put something in and now you're pumping. The water comes to that. Once the water starts to flow, all you have to do is maintain a steady, easy pace. So after you learn to set one goal, after you learn to conquer one passion, after you learn to put some wins under your belt, the others become easier because you now know why. Why is always formulaic. When you know why, anyhow will do. So Shelley, you want to add some thoughts to it while they're thinking of their questions? I don't want to uh, belabor.
Sure. I think there's so much to dive into, I feel like, with this topic, more so that we can get into in a 30 to 45 minute time frame. But I think, some of the questions that we get are always kind of along the lines of how to stay motivated, how to keep our passion going. And just to reiterate Krish's point of remembering your why. And also it made me think of calling and conviction. I feel like sometimes when you're called to something or you're convicted to do something, the passion may go in and out. And I actually find myself in this stage right now where I know that I have a calling and I know that I have a conviction. The passion may not, that emotional high may not necessarily be there, but just having to remind myself of the fact that, listen, this is my calling, this is my conviction. Sometimes it just becomes more of a head thing than a heart thing. And you might go in and out of those phases between the emotional side and kind of the mental side of it. But hopefully that helps some, just really identifying your purpose and your why and keeping that at the forefront to stay on the path.
Yeah, yesterday and today I recorded, I think Wednesday and today's podcast on purpose and productivity. I had done a seminar on personal branding for some major organizations about a year ago. And during this pandemic time, they had asked me if I have got a virtual component of it. So what I did was I condensed it into X number of messages. And I thought I'd put an audio component of that out. So I think we did part 1 on Wednesday and part 2 today. I'd encourage you to go to the Purpose and Productivity podcast, which is available on all the devices, and it's no cost to you. It's just produced out there. We just passed our 50th episode, so there's a ton of messages out there and information. But within the confines of personal branding, I brought up some of the components of a future skill attitude. How do you stay relevant? The consistency and the competency that are going to define you during this time. And as Shelley pointed out, it's the comfort zone thinking versus effective zone. She uses creator and executor. I've always used that comfort and effectiveness. I'm not effective as a person who can get to the nitty gritty. The finer details are not my forte. So I'm willing to guess that I probably sacrificed 15 years of my career with great ideas that probably never manifested into anything because I was on to the next idea. I'm always about what's glittering and what's shining and that kind of stuff. And but now with new devices and new systems out there, I'm learning the component, because here's the other thing. I can't take any of the present moment for granted. Just like this last 6 months have completely turned our world upside down. And we have completely lost any bearing or semblance of reality that we had. What if, and there is a great thing, what if the structure that we now have changes? It can change on a dime. Shelley may decide that, I'm pretty sure she sacrificed a lot to just come and hang out with us, but cream will always rise to the top and good stuff will eventually float away. And our desire is that she outperforms us and outgrows us. But what if that happens? What becomes of me? I still have a few tricks left in my arsenal, so I have to learn. So that's part of it. The other part of staying motivated is observation. It is a very, very hard trait to get late in life. If you're younger, I'd encourage you to amass and adapt to the skill of observation. Look around every day, see what works. Not just what's right and what's wrong. Ask yourself what works, and then ask yourself why. And you'll figure out how you can make it work for you.
So I hope you guys enjoyed today's webinar. Please subscribe on skylifesuccess.com if you're not receiving notifications from us, and we'll be sure to send a recording of this webinar out to everyone.
All righty. As always, thanks guys for allowing me to tag along with you. On behalf of Shelley and Caroline, thanks for journeying with us. Good luck. God bless. Nakam alive.
Thanks, everyone.